So we left off at the scene. We're at 15b4. We're almost at page 16. Get ready with page 16. We were at the very crucial scene in the development of the drama of the Megillah, where the king can't sleep at night. And Badlayla hahu nadadash natamelech. And this is the turning point of many turning points in the story. And because he can't sleep, so a tried and true method, well, reading at night, sometimes, that'll put me to sleep. But of course he doesn't read. He says he wants his servants to read from the record of what's been going on. And we had this paragraph on 15b4 on the right-hand side, this big gigantic paragraph, where we had a kind of an imagining of what's going on, in the unsettled mind of an absolute ruler. Where on the one hand, he has absolute power. On the other hand, he knows that his absolute power also engenders opposition, and he needs people to be supporting him. He needs love. Who loves me? Who doesn't love me? Who's out to get me? Who's my ally? What are the power networks that I need to be absolutely aware of so that I can sleep at night? Because if I don't know where I stand, I can't sleep at night. So they, literally trying to think about the anxieties of a person who feels that maybe his grip on power is not as solid as he would like it to be. And of course, anybody that has power never thinks that their grip on power is as solid as they would like it to be. So so this is what's going on in his mind, according
what
to
Shakespeare said, uneasy lies the head that wears the crown.
Exactly. So he got it from the Megillah.
Okay.
He got it from 15b4. That's where he got it from. So so therefore he says, bring me the record book, the annals of what has happened in the past, what the things that we remember, Sefer HaZichronot Divrei Hayamim. So he wants it read to him. Okay, and of course, in terms of the story, what happens is that they remind him that this guy Mordechai saved his life. Exactly the kinds of things he's worried about. Is there going to be a coup d'etat? Is somebody plotting to assassinate him? How good is my intelligence system, to protect me? And here we had this very unpredictable, unforeseen saving of his life, because this wasn't his secret agents who saved his life. This was Mordechai, who of the goodness of his heart reported something that he heard, that these two courtiers were plotting to get the king. And then the Achashverosh says, "Oh, so what did we do? How did we reward him? Did we give him a medal? Did we do anything?" And they say, "No, you didn't do anything to honor him, to recognize his contribution to the state." And then Achashverosh is about to think about what to do, and knock, knock, knock. Haman is coming to talk to Achashverosh in the middle of the night, apparently, because he's so excited about his new idea that he wants to murder Mordechai by hanging him up on a gallows that he has constructed. So he's about to broach that idea to Achashverosh, but he doesn't get a chance to bring it out because Achashverosh beats him to it in terms of what he wants to say. And he says, "What would you do if you really wanted to honor somebody?" And Haman thinks it's him. So Haman goes like, oh, let's do this. And then Achashverosh says, "Great ideas. I knew I could count on you for those wonderful ideas. Everything that you said, do it for Mordechai." Right? And that's the flipping around. That's the upside down, topsy-turvy, twist of the plot. This is what Purim is all about. And things start looking up from there. Okay, so that's the basic story. We're unpacking the story a little, one little step at a time. So we are now at 15b4, the right-hand side, a little more than halfway down the right-hand column, where it says the Megillah continues, and they were read before the king. So do we have somebody who's going to read for us today? Going once. Come on, somebody's got to read. Going twice. Everybody knows where we are?
Yeah, I'll read it.
before. Thank you.
And the Megillah continues, and they were read before the king. This verbal form teaches that they were read of themselves. Right.
So the Hebrew says, "Vayiyu nikraim lifnei hamelech," and they were read. It's passive form, so it doesn't say "and they read the words to the king." Right? He said the king ordered his courtiers to bring this book of records to read before him, and it should have then said, "Okay," and then they read it before him. But it doesn't say that. It says the words were read before the king. So why is it in that passive form? So the answer is because this shows shenikraim eleim, they were read of themselves. Okay, so look at 56, the note.
Instead of the active form, korim, they read the annals. The verse uses the passive form, nikraim. The annals were read. The scribe charged with the reading of the royal records did not wish to read the section concerning Mordecai's reportage of Bigzan and Seresh's plot against the king. He deliberately turned the pages to avoid that section. However, God turned the pages back and the words were read of themselves.
Okay, so the idea is here, again, who's got something in the game here? Who's got skin in the game? And what the Gemara imagines is that, what do you think? You think that all of these servants of the king are on Mordecai's side? You think that they're all, or that they're neutral? No, they don't want to get this Jewish guy recognized as having done something wonderful beyond what they themselves do. So they wanted to skip this story. When they got to that story, they decided to turn the page. So instead, the Vayu Nikraim, they were read out, right? They were read somehow automatically by against the will of the person who was supposed to be reading the text. So the king heard it despite the resistance of his helpers. That phrase, Nikraim Elehem, is a phrase that we have, not in that quite in that construct. We have Ume'elav Yikareh, and it will be read of its own, right? It will be read of its own being, of its own existence. That phrase is part of Unetane Tokef. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we say that all of our deeds are written in the book of remembrance, and God remembers everything, and everything is written, and then it's Ume'elav Yikareh, and it is read out of its own. So the idea being that no matter, you don't want it to be read out, you would rather we forgot about that part. That's not the chapter that I'm most proud of in my life. It doesn't matter, right? It's going to be read out whether you like it or not. So that's the phrase that's being used here, that this story, even though this is actually a wonderful story, right? Somebody's loyal to the king and does something good, but for these courtiers, they didn't want it. They didn't want it read out. It was read out anyway, right? The truth will out, right? It's just going to come out no matter what. So that's what the Gemara is pointing out here. So it came out.
What is the courtier's motivation?
Jealousy, or they don't want one of somebody that's not from their inner circle to be singled out as being a state hero. He's not part of the club. I mean, again, this is all continuous with so much other stuff that the rabbis are imagining. Mordechai is the outsider. Mordechai is the other, right? When Haman says, "Oh, Mordechai won't bow down, I'm going to kill him," you don't have like a mass demonstration of all the courtiers going, "Okay, you know what? We're all going to take a knee. We're all going to take an anti-knee." Like Mordechai, to show solidarity for Mordechai's courage. Mordechai is an outlier. He's on his own. Okay, so we continue.
Maybe they wanted to read the really boring part so that he would fall asleep, but they didn't want to get him all worked up.
Yeah, you're right. They just basically wanted to be nice to the king. That's because of their own love for the king. Yeah, absolutely.
The following verse states, "And it was found written." The Gemara asks, it should have said a writing was found, since the verse refers to an entry that had been made in the book a long time before. It should have said a writing rather than written, which implies that it had just been written.
Right.
Question mark.
Right. So the English here is a little awkward. The English, they're having a little struggle here with their editorial way of trying to distinguish between the two. And there's also a typo in the Hebrew here, or in the Aramaic, right? The verse says, Vayimatzei katuv, and this is all passive, right? So the same way that the words were read out, it was found that it was written, right? That's so this is all like this very passive constructs of all the words, right? So katuv is an adjectival construct that this was written out. Instead, the Gemara says it should have said, and they found a text. I would have said that translation. Vayimatzei ktav, right? A text, a written text. They found a written record that preserved something that happened a while back. Right, so that's what the Gemara is saying. They should have, instead of saying and the word katuv, therefore, is that it's being written right at the moment. How could that be? Gemara answers.
The use of this form teaches.
And now we're on 16a1. Everybody, 16a1.
That Shimshai, the king's scribe, was erasing from the records book the account of Mordechai's saving the king's life. And the angel Gabriel came and was writing it again into the book. Therefore, the verse uses the expression written to indicate that this record had been recently written.
Right. So the same idea. In other words, just like the courtiers are refusing to read what's right in front of them, they want to skip the page. So now we have one step further. Actually, they wanted to erase the tape, right? There's 18 minutes missing from this tape because they don't want this evidence to be there. And guess what? In this particular miraculous situation, God's angels keep on putting the record back in. They keep on writing it back in. So that's the continuous description of it being written. It was being written as they were looking at it. They were trying to erase it, and there it is being written right in front of them. And therefore it will be read out. Okay, so again, the resistance of the local people comes to no avail. The Gemara deduces. The
Gemara deduces from Gabriel's act. Rabbi Asi said, Rabbi Sheila, a man from the village of Timrata, expounded. If a record below in this world to the merit of Israel does not become erased, then it is not certain that such a record above.
Is it not certain? Is it not certain? How much more so?
Is it not certain that such a record above will not become erased?
Right. So in other words, if God made sure that the physical record in this world below that redounded to Israel's credit, God made sure that it wasn't lost, wasn't forgotten, wasn't destroyed. If that's happening down here below, so of course, how much more so that anything that's being recorded up above, where you don't have bad people trying to resist, trying to, erase history, then how much more so is the history remembered above? And good things that we have done will always be cherished and remembered for our merit. Of course, the flip side is also true. That's what we said, as I said, on Annotated, but everything is going to be, there's not going to be any erasing in and of itself, right? How do we erase the bad stuff? Repentance.
Repentance,
Right, Shuvah. Shuvah takes us, takes the ledger and takes an entry that was recorded there to our detriment, to our debit, and either erases it, or actually it doesn't even erase it. It transfers it over to the merit side, right? Because what it says is, look at that, this person who actually fell and failed, nevertheless, look at that, she picked themselves up and learned from their mistakes. So how wonderful is that? So actually recalling the failure, the sin, is still there, but it's completely recontextualized as being unbelievable. Look at how this person picked themselves up from failure. So it doesn't get erased. So this is what Rabbi Shila Ish Kfar Timrata said, right? Rabbi Shila, the man from the village of Timrata. Okay, so this is of course a sermonic point that is being offered to people to encourage them, right? To make them not lose hope, right? Whatever the situations were that he was addressing in his sermon, in his homily, in his teaching, he was trying to say, no, don't worry, right? Everything good that has ever been done is never lost. It's never forgotten about. Now, the truth of the matter is that in human history, without divine intervention, which is what the story here is saying, without divine intervention, it very well is erased. We've got plenty of good things that people did that have been expunged from history. One of the efforts that is being, this is still Black History Month, I think. One of the efforts in our country among the Black community and in general marginalized people is to keep on fighting and doing the research and retrieval, if it's still possible, the retrieval of all the accomplishments that were forgotten about, that were denied, that were erased, not just in written records, but erased even just socially, and then not remembered, and to give back to people their dignity, to give back to people their sense that, well, no, we weren't just victims, we weren't just slaves, we weren't just nobodies. We actually did all kinds of things, just that our oppressors didn't want us to ever know that we had that power and that kind of talent. Sylvia, yeah. Now you're on mute.
First of all, I was going to say, is this this part of the Talmud an effort to put God back into the story of the Megillah?
Throughout, the Talmud has been doing that the whole time. Absolutely.
It's because it's not part of the actual book
Right.
of Esther.
Right.
So this is how do we explain why it's part of the Torah of the Bible?
Right.
If it doesn't include God.
Yes, absolutely.
Vis-a-vis what you were just saying about erasing history or refining history, we have Holocaust deniers who are trying very hard to erase history, fortunately, very unsuccessfully.
Right. And look, I mean, it's hard you can't remember everything. You can't keep track of everything. It's impossible. Right. But there are things happen naturally. They fall out of people's memory. They fall out of history. But then there's like you say, then there's the choice when people want to deny things, when people want to actually really actively erase things. But this happens, with every group that doesn't quite have it. First of all, it happens with every group, right? Because if we're in power, we want to erase the things that we're ashamed of or that don't reflect so well on us, right? So we want to erase that. If we're not in power, then the people who are in power will make sure to erase anything that speaks to our credit, right? And we don't have the power to rewrite it. So this is like a universal problem, right? Along with the fact that it's impossible to do full justice. In Jewish history, we've had, other kinds of struggles. In Israel today, for a generation, 2 generations, there's been a tremendous struggle among the Mizrahi population, the population that's not Ashkenazim, not from Europe, to say, hey, what do we, chop liver? We've also done plenty of good things. We've also created, as a part of our culture and part of this and part of that. And that wasn't a story that many, of the European elites were interested in telling. They didn't say that. They didn't tell that kind of story. So erasure happens all over the place. And of course, women, have complained forever that the contributions that women have made, despite being second-class citizens, are so numerous, and yet they never get recognized. I go to the gym every once in a while here at the Y, and there's a whole wall of it's from vintage photographs, from old photographs of African-American women from Montclair who were the movers and shakers to create the YMCA, the YWCA. And of course, in the beginning, they had to be separate. The people of color couldn't be in the regular, Christian men's, association. But they were, they're, finally getting their due. They did these things despite all of the obstacles that were placed in their path that they found, in front of them. So remembering is a huge endeavor. And yes, the Holocaust is definitely one of those things. But like there's a whole fight in America today. Do we teach about all of the terrible things that America, is guilty of over the 400 years of white people coming and colonizing this country, and there's a whole strong resistance, in many states and all over the place going, we're not going there. We don't want to hear about that. You're trying to destroy America, and, it's so clear that, we have to be honest. No, let's not be honest. We have to create these terrible myths. Just an association. Yesterday, we read the Torah portion Kitisa, which tells about the terrible episode of the golden calf at Mount Sinai. God gives the Torah, and then the children of Israel decide that they want a golden calf instead. And God wants to destroy the Jewish people. God says, how? This is impossible. Look at what I just did for them. And it's not generations ago. It's not 2,000 years ago. It's not 4,000 years ago. It's not 100 years ago, right? I just did it. And people want to forget about it. And God says, you know what, Moses, you're the only person that I can trust. You're the only person I respect anymore. I'm going to start a new people just from you. And Moses says to God, no, you can't. If you're going to destroy the Jewish people, he says, Mecheni na misifracha asher katafta. Then erase me from the book that you have written. Take me out of the book. My significance is only if it's tied to this imperfect, messed up people, the children of Israel. Otherwise, cross me out, erase me from the history. So, and then God says, I will erase from history who I want to erase. Don't tell me who to erase, but that is God grumbling. And then God says, okay. I'll forgive the Jewish people. Let's see what we can do. And that's the rest of the Torah reading, is this struggle to try to figure out how to reconcile. But Moses is saying, you know what? There's no point in remembering me without the rest of the Jewish people. Josie.
Thing that troubled me was the line that the world will look at you, God, as someone who failed, and it'll diminish your power. I thought that was kind of tricky manipulation.
Well, first of all, manipulation to get people to do something good is not necessarily a sin, right? I think Barry Goldwater said that.
Extreme.
What Moses is saying back to God is this very hard truth that God, you chose this path. You chose to interact in history. You could have sat back, you could have been up in heaven and just had a wonderful, perfect existence and been God Almighty for yourself and not have to deal with any imperfections at all. But you chose to put yourself out there into a world that you created, that's imperfect, that's broken. And then instead of just running away from it, you actually tried to do something about it. Once you try to do something about it, then you own it. Then you have to see it through. Because otherwise you will create the opposite of what you wanted. You wanted a world that would recognize your presence. And if you don't come through in these crucial moments, you will be creating a world that doesn't see your presence at all. That just has more ammunition for saying, you know what, there is no God. Or if it's a God, God is an evil, genie that's out to, to destroy people. And there are many kinds of ideas like that out there too. So that's how I understand Moses. Moses is saying, you'd rather not be bothered with us, troublesome, disgusting, disappointing creatures. You made us. You made us, and you need to have a sense of integrity about it. All right. So back to here. Okay, so now we're in the Megillah relates.
Megillah relates that upon being reminded that Mordecai saved his life, Ahasuerus asked his pages what honor or dignity has been conferred upon Mordecai for this act.
You think they meant that as a pun? He asked his pages, like the pages of the book. Okay. Go ahead.
His pagers answered, nothing has been done for him. Rabbi said, not because they loved Mordecai did they inform Ahasuerus that he was never rewarded. Rather, they did so because they hated Haman, and they knew that it would upset Haman to see Mordecai rewarded by the king.
Okay, so again, I think this is actually quite astute. Continuing again with what we had before, they didn't want to get into this Mordecai thing. They didn't want to make a big deal about Mordecai. But once Mordecai gets singled out, against their will, the automatic reading it out of it, then the next calculation is, well, so what do we do about this? Well, we can stick it to Haman because we are afraid of Haman. We're not exactly going to lead a rebellion against Haman, but we can't stand the guy. We resent him. So hey, the enemy of my enemy is my friend for a moment. This could definitely be one of these like TV shows, like West Wing or all the, which I have never watched. But all of this, this is all political backbiting, intrigue kind of stuff, that's happening in the halls of power, where everybody's just sort of like, it's not about loyalty and it's not about principle. It's about who you can get ahead with at this point and who you hate at this point and so on and so forth. So that's what Rava's jaundiced view is of these these courtiers, these pages. Okay.
Megillah states that Haman had come to inform the king that he planned to hang Mordecai on the gallows, that he had prepared for him. Itana taught from the expression for him, which is seemingly superfluous, we can derive that lo hakin, for himself did he, Haman, prepare the gallows.
Right, lo hechin. The phrase is asher hechin lo, that the Haman came to the king to tell him about the gallows that he had to hang Mordecai on, that he had prepared for him. So the Gemara says, all you needed is he came to the king to tell him that he wanted to hang Mordecai on these gallows that he prepared. Why does it say that he prepared for him? It's redundant. Heichin lo. We know he prepared the gallows to hang Mordechai. We got it. So the answer is that this is, again, a kind of an automatic reading. Haman is saying that something that he doesn't, or he's planning something he doesn't even understand what he's doing. Heichin lo heichin. Who's the him that he prepared it for? He thinks he's preparing it for him, for Mordechai. No, he's preparing it for him, for himself, for Haman, right? The pronoun, third person pronoun him is indefinite. Who is it referring to? No, this is what's going to happen. The comeuppance, as we will eventually, read in the rest of the Megillah. So all of his work was actually, he's designing this to be for the execution of Mordechai, who he hates. All of his hard work is going to come to fruition. It's going to work. It's going to be a very effective gallows for him, right? For Haman. Okay.
The king asked Haman's advice on how to reward a loyal subject. Haman replied with a detailed description of a fitting reward. However, Ahasuerus surprised Haman and said, "Hurry, get the robe and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordechai." "Who is Mordechai?" Ahasuerus answered him, "The Jew." Haman responded to Ahasuerus, "There are many Mordechais among the Jews. Which one do you mean?" Ahasuerus answered him, "The one who sits at the king's gate." Haman,
Okay.
upon realizing...
So 1 second,
Yeah.
1 second. So what this is a micro reading of the phrases that are in the Megillah. If you look at the note 7, we have to if we read the verse continuously, the whole complete verse, then we'll see how the Gemara is chopping it up into pieces. Go ahead.
Entire verse.
Yeah.
The king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse as you have suggested, and do so to Mordechai the Jew who sits in the king's courtyard. Do not omit anything from all that you have suggested."
Right. So what the Gemara is now saying is, the verse could have said, "Do everything and do so to Mordechai." But it doesn't say just to Mordechai. It says to do so to Mordechai the Jew. And it doesn't just say to Mordechai the Jew. It says to Mordechai the Jew who sits in the king's courtyard. Right? So there are qualifiers and identifiers that are added to the verse. So the Gemara imagines that these are actually part of a paraphrase of a conversation. Right? First, Ahasuerus says, "And do so to Mordechai." And Haman starts squirming. Mordechai, I don't know any Mordechai. Who, Mordechai? And he goes, yeah, Mordechai the Jew. Right? That's the next phrase in the verse. And Haman goes, "The Jew? There's a Mordechai. It's such a common name among the Jews. Come on. Who am I supposed to say?" And then he goes, "The one, you know exactly the one." Right? And of course, the point is that in the story, that's exactly who Haman is thinking about. That's who he wants to hang. That's who he's coming to the king to talk about. That I want to celebrate the idea of my power, and authorization to get rid of these enemies. And this is the Mordechai. So now he is, squirming and making believe. I don't know who you're talking about. I have no idea who you're referring to. Can you be a little more specific? Because he's desperate, to somehow, not have this nightmare actually happen to him. We have a similar approach to reading a verse at the beginning of the Akedah, at the beginning of the story of the binding of Isaac. So where God says to Abraham, "Kachna et bidcha et yichidcha asher ahavta et yitzchak." So the phrases, there are 4 phrases where God says, "Please take your son, your only one, whom you love, Isaac." So, again, the Midrash notices this kind of like extra piling on of phrases, and they imagine that this is a conversation between Abraham and God, and Abraham is now in the place so to speak, where Haman is. He's squirming, and God says, "Take your son," and Abraham says, "Take my son. I have two sons." So he says, "Take your only one." Abraham goes, "Well, each one is the only son of their mother." So then he says, "Asher ahavta," the one that you love. He says, "Are you kidding? I love both of them." Finally, God says, "Okay, let's get to let's cut to the chase. Take Isaac." Right. And so that kind of like pushing back a little bit when you're hearing something that you don't want to face, you don't want to hear, is what's imagined in each of these two situations. And of course, in Haman's case, we're delighting with it. In Abraham's case, we tremble. So Achashverosh finally pins him down and says, "Okay, you can't get out of this. This is what you have to do. Do all those great things for Mordechai." So now Haman doesn't give up. Haman keeps on pushing.
Can I just ask a question? I hope it's not too much of a digression about the sources that the rabbis are looking at. So earlier in the tractate, there was a whole discussion of the septa, how do you pronounce it? Septuagint, the Greek translation, and the 70 scribes and all of that. And so I recently came across there's important discrepancies between the Septuagint, the Book of Esther, and the Hebrew version that we read, including whether Esther faints in the presence of the king. So the rabbis obviously were familiar with the Septuagint. When they're doing this sort of close reading of the Book of Esther, are they looking at that, or are they only looking at the Hebrew source, or what do they allow themselves to consider?
It's all over the place. I mean, it's not so much like they're looking at something. You have to imagine this is an oral civilization. We're not talking about people going to a library and
Right.
researching stuff. There are live traditions going on. There are interpretive traditions that are being offered by different people, by different groups, different study circles. So these things are all out there. In many ways, they're competing with each other. And in many ways, they have currency, more or less, depending on who you're hanging out with. So the rabbis have a very strong interpretive tradition of their own, but they're also very well aware of other stuff that's out there. Sometimes they polemicize against it. Sometimes they, accept certain things. But they're pretty much they don't owe the Septuagint anything. They don't see themselves as secondary. Well, if the Septuagint reads it that way, then we have to have it. They see themselves as beholden to a traditional text, which may or may not be identical with what the Septuagint was working with. They have a text that they're working with. That's what's called eventually the Masoretic text, Masorah, the tradition. But we know that there were variations of text, that were circulating previously and during these times. That's part of what the contribution of the Dead Sea Scrolls research was to show that.
But in the tractate itself, they seem to. I can't remember whether there was a discrepancy among the rabbis. I assume there always is, but they seem to say that the Septuagint and the Masoretic texts were identical. That God.
They explain some of the differences, and I mean, they recognize that there were differences,
right?
And they explain some of those differences. Not that they had a different text. In other words, they're defending their text, the integrity of their text, the authority of their text. Oh, you want to tell me that the Septuagint has a different text because they're translating in a way that looks like it's a different text? No, that was a purposeful, mistranslation for the purpose, and so on. Right. So there, what they're definitely taking a stand is, we know that the Septuagint is different. Our version is the correct version, and we can explain some of those differences in a different way.
Yeah.
Right? Scholars are more skeptical about that. And scholars say, well, this is evidence that there are two different versions.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. to Stuart's point, don't you think the 70 rabbis had a goal, and they were going to see all their material the way they wanted as they're collecting it and collating it. They wanted it to be somewhat cohesive and to follow their thinking and what they wanted the people to follow.
Yeah, everybody,
I mean, it's very political in that sense. They were organizing the community to think the way they wanted the community.
Absolutely. Political, though, is not actually
It's
the
the
way we
wrong
think about
word,
it.
but
No, it's not. It's an accurate word, but we should incorporate in the word political, religious and
Right.
spiritual and identity and all these kinds of other things that are values and that are questions that are in every group. The point is the Septuagint predates the rabbinic efforts, right?
where was it written? Where was the Septuagint written?
Septuagint was written by Hellenistic Jews.
That's why it was in Greek.
Greek.
Okay.
And it's mostly placed in Egypt, but it was created over a period of time, over hundreds of years in BCE. So from the 2nd century BCE and forward, and it keeps on as more books are sort of incorporated into the canon. The 5 books of Moses, the Septuagint on the 5 books of Moses is the earliest. Then this Septuagint has to deal with the prophets, because the prophets start getting added. And then the writings are the last things that get written, that get added. And in fact, the book of Esther may have been the very last book that got added to the Bible. So, so the Septuagint is a work in progress, but it starts very early. It starts, like I say, in the 2nd century BCE. The rabbis are part of a living tradition too, but identifiable rabbis don't exist until the 1st century CE.
So you're saying there are 2 streams, if you will.
Many streams. There are many streams
Right, but
going
this
on.
Septuagint represents a major collection of streams and what we call.
Right.
Rabbi
Historically
and others.
speaking, Jews are grappling with a sacred scripture, deciding what gets included in the sacred scripture.
Right.
We don't decide anymore. We're stuck with what we got. But earlier on in the before the Common Era, it was much more fluid. The 5 books of Moses was no longer fluid, according to scholars, by the 3rd century, maybe even the 4th century BCE. Right. So that's it.
Was
That's it.
identical.
So then once you've got a solid identifiable work, then you can start talking about additions. You can start talking about translations. You can start talking about interpretations, and then more stuff keeps getting added until we finally accrue this library that's called Tanakh, that's called the Hebrew Bible. Right. And what we know from, again, from history is, what did the Christians think? The Christians said, no, we're still fluid. We can still add more. We can still add more books to the Bible. In fact, we can add better books to the Bible. Right. And that's the point of no return in terms of Jewish identity versus a new religious group. So religious groups, the politics that you're talking about, the religious groups, these are fundamental questions of who are we, who are our allies, who are not our allies, who are we talking to, who gets what we're trying to do. When somebody says an interpretation, is that with an agenda that we can buy into, or is that an agenda that's actually against what we want to buy into? Right? I mean, look, the Hebrew Bible is part of Christian scripture. Interpretation of the Hebrew Bible by Christians is against our agenda. Their agenda is this Hebrew Bible is constantly, giving hints of Jesus. Everything that's in the Hebrew Bible is understood by them to be valid only because it is a prophetic hint that predicts the life and career of Jesus. That's against our agenda. But that's why they preserved it. That's why it's holy for them.
So did the Septuagint sort of disappear, or was there an equivalent of a Talmud to the Septuagint?
There's no Talmud to the Septuagint. The Septuagint is a translation, and other translations were created. The rabbis created Aramaic translations. Remember, the Septuagint is Greek,
Right.
so it was useful for Hellenistic diaspora communities. Once it became favored as an access point for Christians, it became less and less of interest to the Jews, less and less used by the Jews, and we have Aramaic translations. So, for instance, here's I use this Chumash. Here's a traditional Chumash. So, in the big, this is the Torah, right? This is the book of Vayikra, right? So here's the words of the Torah. Here is an Aramaic translation that was produced under rabbinic auspices. Here is another Aramaic translation produced under rabbinic auspices. So these are multiple translation projects, the same way that we have the Eitz Chaim Chumash is a translation, and then the Stone Chumash is a translation. Different groups start putting out different paraphrases, translations, interpretations, and so on and so forth. So the Septuagint became irrelevant for the Jewish community in the land of Israel and then Babylonia. Babylonia, Greek wasn't a significant language, so that wasn't what they were looking at. Now it was preserved mostly by Christian communities, but it's of interest to us now because it gives us entree into a particular moment in the development of people's thinking about the Torah. So now we use it, just like we have. Here's a here's a book, the Jewish Annotated New Testament, right? So this is the Gospels, but it's the Gospels read with a Jewish commentary. Now, what is it saying about Judaism? What is it? How is it referring back to the 5 books of Moses? What about this law? What about that? Politically, sociologically, what's going on from a Jewish perspective, right? This interpretive work is not what you're going to see, in church. So
now there's a Yiddish translation of the New Testament.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Look, they're very, that's part of their evangelical, project. They want everybody, they want to get it translated into every single possible human language, for sure.
But I mean, it's circulating. There was just in the news this week that the evangelicals are giving out copies within the Haredi communities or ultra-Orthodox communities, like maybe in the U.S. I guess.
All right. What can I tell you?
Copies of the New Testament or the Old Testament?
No.
Copies of the New Testament translated into Yiddish.
In Yiddish. Okay, that's what I.
Right.
Which
I mean,
is
I have a. And that's a very interesting thing. Remember that look, we study in English and so on and so forth, but every Shabbat we make a point of reading the Torah in the original, right? The Hebrew words, whether we understand them or not. The Christian Bible is almost nowhere read in the original, right? The Christian Bible was written in a kind of a vernacular Greek, it's called koine, a certain version of Greek. And you have to be a scholar to know what that is. And then they start having fights about whether the translations are good translations, but there is nowhere, anywhere, 99% of Christian communities in the world, in Greece, maybe they read it in Greek, or the Greek Orthodox maybe read it in Greek, but nobody reads the Christian Bible in the original. The Christian Bible is always a Bible in translation.
Are you saying that it was not written in ancient Greek? It was written in a vernacular Greek?
An ancient vernacular. In other words, it was written in the Greek of the people. Not, okay. It's not Aristotle's Greek or something like that.
That's why I'm curious. I may be the only one here who tried to struggle through a little bit of the Greek New Testament, but that's.
You know, so
Lost on me by now.
I just saw.
I thought it was ancient Greek. I didn't realize it was not ancient.
It's ancient Greek, but it's
Well,
not ancient classical Greek.
I didn't realize that difference. We were not told that at the time.
So, but the point is that they don't read the Bible in their own original. Forget about the fact that they're not reading the Torah in Hebrew. They're not reading their own Bible in its own original, right? So, you know, it's already one step beyond, you know, the source. I just saw a documentary. Thank you. There's the link in the chat for a Times of Israel article about the evangelicals doing the Jewish people another good favor. Thank you. The documentary that I saw, which is still a work in progress, is about a whole bunch of Christians who are very upset. We have our own issues, right, with whether or not the verses in Leviticus condemn homosexual behavior or not, right? So I did a lot of work on that, and I insisted that we have a different translation. The words stay the same, and then we have to say, well, what do those words actually say? So we have that in the book of Leviticus, in Vayikra, the only place where you have any, reference to something that might have to do with homosexual law, activities and so on. But in the Christian Bible, there are a number of places where Paul condemns somebody. And who is Paul condemning? Who says they're not? Who Paul says they don't go to heaven. So it's Greek words that are these references to some kind of class of people. And how do you translate those Greek words? So until 1946, nobody translated those Greek words. This is all based on this movie, so this in documentary. So I'm not a maven about this at all. Actually, I should look and see what they say here in the annotated edition. But nobody translated those Greek words as homosexual until 1946. In 1946, the Revised Standard Version, the RSV, which became the most popular English Bible ever, anywhere, put it in as homosexuals are going to hell, right? So that became a crisis, of course, for anybody that wanted to stay in the church who was homosexual or whose heart went out to people who were homosexual. So the movie is about these people who are struggling to argue that that's a bad translation and that shouldn't be the translation, and you have to know Greek and blah, blah, blah. So that's not important, but it's all about this being, tied, to whatever somebody decides the translation should be. Right? So this is a real issue. So there it is. What can I tell you?
Back to translation problems.
Yeah. Very, very, very interesting. All right, let's see now where we go here. We're back here. So Haman is trying to get out of, he's trying to like wiggle his way out of having to do this nice thing, reward for Mordechai. And now he tries a different attack. So we're in 16A1, the right-hand column, and we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the sixth line from the top, in brackets, Haman,
upon realizing his mistake, said to Ahasuerus, it is sufficient for him to be given one village or one river from which he can collect taxes.
Right.
Ahasuerus answered him, this too give him. This last reply of Ahasuerus is indicated by the words, do not omit anything from all that you suggested.
Right. So if you went back to note 7, the verse says, right, at the bottom, the king said to Haman, read it one more time, please.
Hurry, take the robe and the horse as you have suggested, and do so to Mordechai the Jew who sits in the king's courtyard. Do not omit anything from all that you have suggested.
So the Gemara again is parsing this statement, that do not omit anything from all that you have suggested. That's all covered. He already covered all of that in the beginning. He says, do this, to take the horse, take the globe, take the garments, etc. So what is this? And do not omit anything that you have suggested. So the Gemara adds, you know what? He suggested something else, that he tried to deflect the king. Instead of doing this public procession where Mordechai is all in this royal regalia and is celebrated on the streets of Shushan, why don't you just give him a province someplace? Why don't you just give him some piece of land someplace, some source of income someplace? That's a real, instead of some momentary, spotlight of fame, give him some. But for Haman, of course, he doesn't care that Mordechai might get the extra income. He cares about the public recognition. So he's trying to, push Achashverosh into that other direction. And of course, he doesn't succeed, according to the way the Gemara is, very satisfied to say, yeah. And guess what? Not only did Haman give the ideas to Mordechai, to Achashverosh about publicly, parading Mordechai in the streets, but everything that he wanted to do to try to thwart this became an extra reward. So yes, Achashverosh says, you know what? Don't even that. That's also a great idea. Make sure that that's also added, right? Everything that you have said. Don't omit anything. So that's how the Gemara is enjoying, this revenge. Okay.
Haman was forced to carry out the king's order, and then Haman took the garments and the horse. He went and found that rabbis were sitting before Mordechai, and he was demonstrating the laws of Kamitsa to these rabbis. When Mordechai saw that Haman was coming towards him with the king's horse held in his hand, he became afraid. Mordechai told the rabbis, "This wicked man is coming to kill me. Move away from him so that you two are not burned by his coal." At that moment, Mordechai wrapped himself in his cloak and stood up to pray.
Right. So his cloak is a talit that he's wrapped in, and he's ready to die. He's ready to be killed by Haman, but he first, tells the rabbis that he's hanging out with, flee for your lives, protect yourselves, get out of the way, go to safety. The Gemara imagines that they're having a learned study session, Gesundheit, and they even imagine what the topic of the discussion was, and that Mordechai was discussing with the rabbis and teaching about the laws of Kamitsa. So Kamitsa, look at where is this?
11.
11. Thank you.
The first of the 4 essential services of a mincha, flour offering. The Kohen holds his hands open, puts it vertically into the vessel containing the mincha, bends his 3 middle fingers against his palm, turns his hand upward and lifts it out of the vessel. That which he now holds is the komets, which is the only part of the mincha offered on the altar.
Right. So the mincha is the one non-animal sacrifice. The word mincha we are familiar with as an afternoon prayer because it was given in the afternoon, but mincha really means offering, present, a gift. That's what the word mincha means. So it's an extra gift to God. And it's flour mixed with oil, and it's mixed together in different ways. There's different types of mincha, but the flour that gets and it becomes like a cake or a pancake, and most of it is eaten by the priests, but a little bit of it, just like the animals that are offered as sacrifices, a little bit of the animal is put on the altar and burned up on the altar, and then the rest of it, except if it's a olah, which is completely burnt on the altar. But other animals, that's how you had you had a bar mitzvah to celebrate. You brought a big, bull to the temple. They took out the guts. They put it on the altar. They gave you back the meat, and then you had a party. And that was, a holy party of well-being, celebrating God's goodness. So mincha was given for all kinds of reasons, but also it was the poor person's offering because it was the cheapest thing that you could imagine. And but some of the offering has to go on the altar. So how do you get that little bit that's there? So it's like in the old-fashioned cookbooks. A pinch of salt. You put a little bit of salt, into the thing. So here you have to put a little bit of flour. So the idea is that these fingers, right here, these fingers go like this. They grasp some what do you call it? Some flour from out of the packet of the flour. They get lifted out and they get thrown onto the altar. So that's called Kamitsa, right? A kometz is like a little handful. That's what it is. So that's what they were discussing. We'll come back to why this is the thing that the Talmud is imagining had to have been their topic. But anyway, so they're in the middle of Torah discussion. Haman comes, and Mordechai doesn't know that this is actually a good thing. Mordechai is convinced that his time is up, that he's going to be murdered now by Haman, and he shoos away the other rabbis, right? And then he stands up and he prays to God his last prayer, what he thinks will be his final prayer before he's killed.
I don't want to take us off track, but why is that preserved for the mincha service?
The mincha service is the timing, right? The timing is give a gift to God, give a little gift to God. The mincha service is the shortest, simplest service, the way that the mincha offering was the shortest, simplest sacrifice. And the timing was in the afternoon, right? As opposed to the morning and the evening. So that's what a mincha service is, the afternoon, prayers. And it's, take a couple of minutes and give a gift to God. Okay, so back to here. The Gemara relates.
Gemara relates the encounter with Haman. Haman came and sat before them and waited until Mordecai finished his prayers. He asked the disciples, "With what topic of study are you occupied?" They answered him, "When the holy temple was in existence, one who pledged a mincha offering brought a fistful of fine flour and would gain atonement through it." Haman said to them, "Your fistful of flour has come and pushed aside my 10,000 silver talents, which I was willing to pay Ahasuerus to destroy the Jews." Mordecai, upon hearing this, said to Haman, "Villain, if a slave acquires property, to whom does the slave belong, and to whom does the property belong? It certainly belongs to his master. Since you are my slave, that money was mine, not yours."
Okay, so the working out of this scenario is that we have Haman actually letting Mordecai finish his prayer. Now, of course, from Mordecai's perspective, that's a little bit, there's a tension going on. And, why doesn't he just chop his head off while he's praying? But of course, because Haman can't, because Haman is actually supposed to be now, taking Mordecai and not killing him, but elevating him and celebrating him. But so you have nobody knows what the other person, nobody's thinking what the other person is thinking, is what I'm saying, right? Haman knows what he's up to. Mordecai thinks he's up to something else. So he's convinced that something else is going on, right? And then we have the fact that there are some people who are still around. Did they not get a chance to run away? Did they decide not to run away? It's not clear. But we imagine that Haman is, while he's waiting for Mordecai to finish praying, he says to the people that were at the study session, "What's all this about? What are you doing?" So they explained to him that this is the way we're talking about things from bygone days. The first temple had been destroyed by the Babylonians. We're now sometime after that, and there is no temple yet, but we're still remembering about what was done in the temple, and the way people were able to come close to God and be accepted by God and forgiven by God. Here we have also a kind of a misdirection of what one person is thinking and the other person is thinking, because what's the original understanding that the tradition has? Why is this Kamitsa business being discussed? Look at note 12.
Note 12. Mordechai was teaching them the laws of Kamitsa because they were pertinent to that day, which was the 16th of Nisan. For when the temple was in existence, the Omer offering, a type of mincha, was brought on that day.
Okay, so giving the timing of when everybody was worried about Haman's decree, we figure it out. Don't ask me all the details. We figure it out that this is happening on the 16th day of Nisan, the day after Pesach. The day after Pesach is when the Omer starts, and we start counting the Omer to get to Shavuos. So the Omer is a grain offering, right? The Omer is this kind of a mincha offering. So they were discussing the the requirements for that. Okay, now look at 14.
Even though, as cited in note 12, they were studying the topic of Kamitsa because it was the 16th of Nisan, the day the Omer offering was brought, this statement of the disciples does not refer to the Omer offering, which was obligatory.
Right. So they're telling him something else entirely. They're not.
Okay.
What?
The note continues.
Okay.
It was obligatory, not voluntary, that it could be pledged. Rather, it refers to a voluntary mincha offering brought by a poor man who could not afford the usual animal offering. For the disciples were showing Haman that even a poor man's offering consisting of mere flour can be an atonement. Right.
So of course they're not telling Haman anything. They're telling the Jewish people who are listening to the story. Right. So what we have is multiple levels of how we're telling the story and how we're trying to teach certain lessons. And this is, again, like a kind of a polemic, right? On the one hand, we will never give up studying our Torah. We will never give up remembering the temple. We will never give up trying to synchronize ourselves to the ancient rhythms, the calendar, the way it should be. That's one thing, right? On the other hand, we're also talking here about values, right? And we're talking about what does it mean to be a good person? And that the Torah that we have says that every person, no matter how poor they are, has the opportunity to be close to God, to be accepted by God. And of course, Haman is the opposite. Haman is the person of burning ambition. Haman is the person who wants fame and fortune and who wants everything and more, and then more after that, right? So the idea that's being juxtaposed here is these two antithetical concepts of being a person, of being a human being. And then what the Gemara says is that putting in the mouth of Haman that dedication to goodness in the end is what saves us against Haman's plans, right? That valuation of that little piece of flour that we take and give to God, it's in the merit of that goodness that Haman's entire plan is going to be canceled and destroyed. And therefore, Haman, who thought he was going to get all that money, we had a whole negotiation with Achashverosh before, that this is what he's going to benefit by destroying all the Jews. He'll collect a ton of money. He'll give a tiny percentage to Achashverosh, so it's worth it for Achashverosh to authorize the killing of the Jews. It's in his interest. It's all about money, right? So here we have the two systems put into very, very stark, contrast and opposition to each other. All right. The end part, just to wrap this up, there's we had it also earlier that one of Haman's resentments is that he had a history with Mordechai, and that he could never forgive Mordechai because Mordechai was once upon a time his boss and was more fortunate and had power over him. We looked at that a number of times before, and that's part of what was driving him. His like hatred for Mordechai is not only just plain and pure anti-Semitism, and not just plain and pure evil, but also it's personal. You know, it's a personal resentment. And now, Mordechai says back to Haman, you think that you were going to become this big shot with making all this money and everything. You'll never, ever escape being seen as my slave. And whatever it is that you think you would gain, whatever a slave gains belongs to their master. And I am your master, and I always will be your master. So there's nothing you can do about it, right? So this is, again, this very, reasserting of Jewish pride and standing in front of this oppressor. All right, we'll continue next time, God willing, and have a great week. Okay.
Thank you. Yashar Koach.